One Ontario teacher union back in the classroom, one ramping up its job action in the classroom, and another poised to leave the classroom come September. Joining us now for more on Ontario's education unrest, here's Chris Rashowi. She's education reporter for the Toronto Star, and we are delighted to welcome you. Not just to TVO, but to your television debut.
Thank you.
I can't believe you've never done TV before, covering the education wars over the years. But thank you for making it here with us. The Labour Board this past week decided that these strikes, which had gone on for some period of time, 15, 20, 25 days, were illegal. Upon what did they base that decision?
Well, in Ontario, we now have two-tier bargaining. It was brought in legislation earlier this year, and it's central bargaining and local bargaining. So some issues are considered central, and they're negotiated between the provincial government, the unions, and the school boards associations. Things like class size, salary, the big money items. And then we have local bargaining, and that's on more sort of mundane process kind of issues, things like personnel files, performance appraisals, and things like that.
Keys to the staff room too, I gather.
Yes, things like that.
Right,
yeah.
okay. So you've got this two-tier bargaining, and on what basis did the Labour Relations Board say, you guys can't be out, this is an illegal strike?
Well, the school boards went to the Labour Board and said, look, all these teachers have signs saying, 40 is a speed limit, not a class size, and things like that. There was some messaging out to members about class sizes, and that seemed to be the thing that some union members were saying even to the press, that class size was the reason they were striking. And they're not allowed to strike over that issue. It's a provincial issue, and it was a local strike that was called, and that's why the strikes were ruled unlawful. Now, the chair of the Labour Relations Board did say he put a 2-week moratorium on their strike, just saying that the strikes were not unlawful in the sense that the union did make all the go through the entire process to get to the strike position, but that there were some issues that needed to be cleansed.
What was with that word? He did say that, cleanse.
So that's things like, I think, probably getting rid of the signs that said class size, and probably better informing members that when they were speaking to the media about issues, that they didn't mention class size.
Now, there was an impression, I know, in discussion at the legislature that, okay, the Labour Board has ruled, the strike is illegal, you got to go back in the classroom, so what do we need this back to work legislation for anyway if the strike's illegal and you got to go back? What's the answer to that?
Well, the OLRB in the decision said it's a 2-week moratorium. So you cleanse the class size and all the other issues that aren't supposed to be there, and you can go back on strike. So that would be June the 10th. So the union said, just hours after teachers returned to class, we're going to go on strike June the 10th. So that's why the legislation was needed, and it keeps students in class until the end of the school year. Into
the very end of the school year. All right, let's talk about where we now find ourselves as a result of these decisions. At the elementary level, ETFO has been on I guess they call it a work to rule campaign now for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
What has that involved?
Initially, it started out with things like they've said they're not going to put report card comments on report cards. They're not taking part in extra training or workshops to do with ministry initiatives, and they were not going to take part in EQAO testing, which actually would be going on right now.
EQAO, the Education Quality Assurance.
Yes, so that's reading, writing, and math for students in grades 3 and 6. So that's not happening in any public elementary schools in Ontario.
What's the significance of these job actions in your view?
They're mostly aimed at the provincial government and ministry initiatives, largely administrative. Not a lot of things parents would notice. Standardized testing, maybe. At the end of the school year, yes, they will notice with report cards that come home with marks only.
And no comments.
And no comments.
The EQAO, missing this one test, I mean, they've been obviously keeping EQAO records for a long time. They're going to miss this one opportunity. Is that going to dramatically skew whatever results they get going forward?
It's going to be difficult for them because public elementary students are the bulk of elementary students, and nobody in grade 3 and nobody in grade 6 will be writing it. So yes, they are going to have to modify, I think, when they are tracking in the future.
We're here on Friday. ETFO says on Monday they're going to kick it up a notch. What does that mean?
Well, when they announced phase 1 of their work to rule, they said a phase 2 was coming. So basically what they've said is, again, it's largely administrative. The one thing I think people have noticed is that they're not going to take part in training for new curriculum, which would include the new sexual education curriculum.
So they're not going to be teaching that? Or
they're going to teach it, they're just not going to be trained to teach it.
Trained to teach it?
Yeah. So there would be workshops, seminars for them to take in order to learn the new curriculum, which is, hasn't been updated in decades.
Right. Let's understand what all this means in terms of its legality. All of this work to rule, are they allowed to do this?
They are. Yes, they are in a legal strike position, so they are allowed to do this.
So it may irritate people, but the reality is they're not doing anything illegal.
No, they're not.
Okay, understood. Are the elementary level issues also related to this two-tier bargaining that you described off the top?
I think in part they are. I mean, it's a complicated process. It's brand new. I think all sides are coming to it thinking it's very high stakes. It will be a precedent-setting decision, right? It will be a precedent-setting contract for them. It's the first one.
And they've been without a contract since
August.
Beginning of the school year.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's a long time.
Yeah.
All right, let's play a clip here. We had Janet McDougall, who was the chair of the Peel District School Board, on this program a little while ago, talking about this two-tiered bargaining system, which, as you point out, is brand new. The Kathleen Wynne government did bring it in. Her view was, it's not working. This is a management position. It's not working. So let's play this clip and then we'll chat about it, okay? Let's roll it, please.
Local school boards have no revenue source except the provincial government, except the ministry. And so, in my opinion, I think the central table, the provincial table, with all of those people who are meeting, should have settled first. Because then local boards, and there's only 3 of us that have been targeted so far, local boards can fit themselves in to that framework, and I believe we could have got a deal, I wouldn't say simply, but quickly.
Based on your coverage and reading of this situation, do you think she's right? They should have gone for the central table settlement first, and therefore it would have been easier along the way?
Well, I think in one way it makes sense. These are the big issues. They're the money issues, and the government controls the money. The unions would say, however, that there's nothing preventing them from getting local deals. The local deals don't have to do with the big money items. So why can't you hammer out, where personnel files are going to be kept or how many personnel files a teacher has?
Do you believe that the two-tier negotiating system, based on what you're hearing from all of the players involved, hasn't worked?
I think it's been difficult, and certainly Janet McDougall would say that there's too many moving parts. You've got the central talks there are 9 different tables going on with all the different unions, and then you've got all the local talks as well, and that's 72 boards, elementary, secondary, and support staff. And if you look at the process with regards to the support staff, they're represented by CUPE. They're still hammering out what's to be discussed centrally and locally. They haven't even hammered that out yet, so they're way behind in the process.
Have you heard whether there's any appetite at Queen's Park at all in government circles to reconsider, reevaluate, change this two-tier bargaining process?
There is a mechanism in the legislation for it to be reviewed, and I think the Premier has said that she's willing to do that at the end of it, just to see what worked and what didn't.
But that's after this is all said
That
and
would be
done.
after the fact, yes.
Do you think there will be an after the fact in all of this?
Well, I think
it's not looking good right now.
It's not looking good, and certainly not looking good for the fall. But definitely, I think they're all committed to making it better. They all agreed to this process. That's another point that's important to make. The school boards, the unions, and the government all agreed to this process. So I think, they're all invested in making it better.
Well, let me push back a bit on that. They all agreed to this process, not necessarily because they all thought it would work, but because, well, let me tell you what I'm hearing, and you can tell me if this makes any sense. The suggestion is the unions love this idea because they, of course, can play off one side against the other, and they can use, province-wide issues to affect the local issues and vice versa. So it may not actually work best for everybody, but in terms of the strength of your bargaining position, it may give you added clout. Is that fair to say?
I think so. I mean, certainly you can strike locally or centrally, so there's always a threat of strike at either level.
The PC education critic Garfield Dunlop, who represents one of the Simcoe ridings, I think.
North, yes.
Simcoe North, yeah. He's warned that legislating the teachers back to work is just a Band-Aid settlement, that there will be chaos after Labor Day. Based on what you're seeing right now, how right do you think he is?
Well, I think there will be chaos, and I think they're very angry about the back-to-work legislation. They said it's inflamed a situation that's already rife with trouble. And I think for the fall, it does not bode well.
What was the alternative to back-to-work legislation? I mean, the Education Relations Commission said these kids are going to lose their year if they don't get back to work.
There was no alternative. I don't think the government had an alternative.
OECTA now is into the mix, the Ontario English Catholic Teachers Association. They are now saying they may strike in the fall if things don't settle. How bad's that looking right now?
They still have dates. I think they've got 8 upcoming bargaining dates, and I think they're having discussions with a mediator as well, and mediator present. They've said in the fall it would be work to rule that they would start with, but definitely they're gearing up for job action as well.
Can the OSF, the secondary teachers, OSSTF, can they strike in the fall as well?
They can, yes.
They can.
Any indication as can the elementary.
Any indication of how that's looking or going?
I don't know. I don't know at this point. I mean, it's not looking good, that's for sure.
Let me take a step back. Bigger picture here. You and I have been watching this stuff for a long time. I actually remember going back to the Bill Davis days when they kept chanting the teacher union, save us from Davis. They had problems with him. The teachers' unions in 1990 were overwhelmingly against David Peterson's Liberal government, and they helped defeat him. After 1990, they didn't like Bob Ray's social contract, and they helped defeat the NDP government. Then came Mike Harris. This just in, they didn't love Mike Harris very much either. Work to rule, days of action, 120,000 teachers in the streets. There was peace under Dalton McGuinty, but they paid for it, right?
For a time, there was peace under Dalton
There was
McGuinty,
peace under
yes.
Dalton McGuinty for a time, but it cost, wage settlements of 3% a year. Now here's Kathleen Wynne, who came up as a school trustee, who got into politics because of education wars in the Harris government years. They don't like her either. What do you infer from all this?
Well, I think for her, there's a lot of lingering resentment from a couple of years ago where contracts were imposed on the teachers. Then she was elected Liberal leader and, made it so there was a bit of bargaining on some issues, but not a lot. So I think there's a bit of resentment still from that. And I think now part of the problem too is the government said from the get-go, the Premier said, the Finance Minister and the Education Minister have all said, there's no money. It has to be a net zero contract. So you get a gain, you have to pay for it somewhere else.
A net zero means, well, if teachers are accustomed to getting 3% a year, as they were in the McGuinty years, net zero is a problem for them, I presume.
It is. Although they haven't had a raise in the last few years. Yeah.
So and you think there's still a hangover of that back-to-work legislation, Bill 115, as it was then called, from the
so.
McGuinty years?
Yeah,
They're not over that yet.
I don't think so, no.
But here's the bottom line. If the teachers didn't like the first Liberal government of 30 years ago, and the first Conservative government, I guess, of even 40 years ago, and they didn't like the NDP, and they didn't like Mike Harris, and they didn't like McGuinty by the end, and now they don't like Kathleen Wynne, what government of what stripe is good enough to satisfy the teacher unions?
Well, there are different issues under each premier, but certainly, yes. I mean, they have had difficult relations over the years, so I don't know.
Do you know if there's any discussion going on anywhere around Queen's Park right now to take away the teacher union's right to strike?
I have not heard that, and I don't think they would do that.
Not this government.
I don't think so. I don't think they would. There was also a judgment out, I think it was the Supreme Court, and it came out of Saskatchewan, affirming the right to strike.
Can you imagine if the Conservatives were to win the next election, whether or not they might move on that, taking away the right to strike?
Well, they've said they would, but I don't know if they would for teachers. I don't know.
What would it take, do you think, at this stage of the game to mend the relationship between the government and the teacher unions?
Okay, that's a tough question. I mean, I think they all have to get back to the table. Everybody's pretty firmly entrenched, so I think maybe a bit of wiggle room on all sides might help. There are no local contracts that have been hammered out either. There are no contracts right now. So, I mean, it's a tough road ahead.
Does the system look to you like it needs blowing up?
I think it does need some kind of fine-tuning or revamp at the end of all of this, yeah.
Can you imagine what that might look like?
I don't know. I mean, I guess this time round, they've all taken pretty firm stances. I don't know if they would change that under any kind of other system. It's still negotiating.
Do you sense that there is any kind of split between what the teacher union leaders are saying and doing and the vast majority of the membership?
Well, I mean, they certainly had good turnouts for rallies and things like that. Although, our Queen's Park reporters did speak to some teachers who were at the rally at Queen's Park a couple weeks ago, and some of them did say they wish they were back on the job. I think they want to be back on the job.
They like teaching.
They like
want to
teaching,
teach.
right?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, they don't want what they're calling contract strips. They don't want to have any takeaways.
If somehow, would it be advisable for the government to change its mind on this net zero business, and would that buy peace for the moment?
It could. I think the class size issue is the big issue, especially for the secondary teachers. The school boards want a little bit of flexibility with class size. That seems to me to be the big sticking point right now. So maybe if there was some movement on that.
What does that mean, movement on class size?
Well, right now they're all kinds of different contracts, and each different contract locally has it has a class cap. There might be flexibility built in, so you could have a class of 30. But then if 3 students show up, you can still have that class. You don't need to split it in 2. The school boards are looking for flexibility on that, so that you can, if students show up in September or mid-year, you don't have to split it into 2 classes and cancel another class. The teachers are worried about big class sizes.
Can we just understand that a little better? Are there hard caps on class sizes in Ontario?
In some places, yes. Some places there are hard caps. Other places have hard caps with a flex built in, so it might be 10 or 15%. You can add extra students to that class, but only 10% of classes can go over the cap.
And are there any issues about full-day kindergarten as a part of any of this? I mean, this is now fully implemented after 5 years, right?
I mean, the thing you keep hearing about full-day kindergarten is the class sizes. They're pretty big.
I hear
Mind
that
you,
too.
there are 2 adults in the room, so that's what the government and the school boards will say. We have a teacher and an ECE, so if there are 26, 30 kids, that's 1 adult per 15 children, which is a better ratio than you got before. But again, it's 30 little kids in a classroom, which is pretty noisy.
Right on. The one thing I do hear Liz Sandals saying in the legislature over and over again, because the teachers have made this argument, you know, and you see this on Twitter as well, the teachers say this Ontario government is starving education, that they aren't spending what's required. They're cutting back. That's what you hear. Liz Sandals gets up in the legislature and says, we were spending $22.5 billion last year. We're going to spend $22.5 billion this year, despite declining enrollment. Who's right on that?
The government is spending more. Every year is spending more on education. A lot of it's targeted to special programming. A lot of the extra money is going to full-day kindergarten. Again, extra jobs for teachers and jobs for ECEs as well. The other thing is there is a new formula for special education. So some boards are seeing cutbacks to special education, as we saw recently with the Toronto Public and Toronto Catholic boards. They were making cutbacks. The funding's been changed around a little bit. So the Peel board, for example, is getting more money. So there are other boards seeing cutbacks.
There was one other thing I wanted to ask you, and that was about 20 years ago when the teachers went out during the Mike Harris years. The government said, keep your receipts for the childcare that you have to hire to deal with your kids, and we'll pick that up. There was some discussion I heard this year about that as well, but I don't know if it went anywhere. Do you know where that's at?
You mean if teachers were on strike?
Yeah.
I haven't heard that, no.
Yeah, because I was hearing some rumblings at Queen's Park about the possibility that, you know, if you've got to hire babysitting, obviously, to take care of your kids during the day because you've got to go to work, keep those and potentially will reimburse. That
Well,
hasn't
I
gone
believe
anywhere?
out in BC, when the teachers were on strike last year, that did happen. Parents were reimbursed somewhat for babysitting costs.
Last question. The McGuinty government used to pride itself on the fact that there wasn't a single lost day until Bill 115 came in.
Yeah.
Wasn't a single lost day to teacher strikes compared to, I think they said like 21 million lost days to school strikes under, if you add up every,
Add up every teacher.
every teacher, every kid represents a lost day. They can't boast about that anymore. What's the government's record on education looking like right now?
Right now, it doesn't look great. There's a lot of turmoil, and it's at every level, right? It's with support staff and all teacher groups. I mean, I know in the past, Kathleen Wynne, the Premier's had a very strong relationship with the teacher unions. I mean, they went campaigning for her when she was running against John Tory. They went door to door for her.
This is in the 2007 election in her riding when she was just a cabinet minister.
Right, and when she beat John Tory.
Yeah.
So she's had a very good relationship with the teacher unions. I think it has soured now, and certainly it has soured for Liz Sandals as well.
The education minister. Okay, Chris, thanks a lot. Appreciate you coming in tonight. That's the education reporter for the Toronto Star, Chris Brashowy.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.